Okay. Welcome everyone. Happy to have you guys here for another fun installment and as Mario would say, the best episode yet of our school platform. Today we're going to be talking about something very near and dear to my heart. Something I've personally experienced and something that has caused me a lot of pain and suffering. And that's what happens when your best employee quits, right? And how to prevent them from and keep them happy. Okay, so just out of curiosity, as we get going here, how many of you guys have experienced having a top employee just quit out of the blue? Okay, and how that how did that initially feel for you? Was it like the world was coming down? Okay. How many of you guys could honestly say it was preventable or you were just in shock? And I know we all got our own impressions of this, right? But what I'm going to tell you after making this mistake many times, especially in my earlier days, is good employees don't quit because of pay. All right, they quit because we mistreat them, all right, or we don't appreciate them. So most of the time, they're quitting the job. They're quitting you as a leader. Okay. So, what I want to talk to you today about, and what I hopefully can help you guys to look at, is a lot of times as owners, we're looking big view, or even as managers, we're looking at the big view. All right, and we miss those opportunities to connect with key employees, key staff. And a lot of times it's very identifiable, especially if you have a system. And my recommendation is the system I'm teaching to you today is very, very simple. Okay. I call it not being a prick. All right. And there's an acronym that goes with this. All right. But this is something that if you want to take very seriously and that you want to see real results, even turn things around that may be going south on you, all right, that you can implement not just with yourself, all right, but teach it to all of your staff, teach it to everybody in your organization. All right. It should be an open and honest, you know, activity that you're doing. I recommend once a quarter, if you can. If not, semi-annually, where we actually sit down with our trainer, remind them, okay, of not being a prick. Okay, and we're going to again use that acronym for a good reason. Um, so let's get into this. I'm going to share the SOP that I have for you guys today. By the way, all you guys can grab it from the chat. All right, and I share my screen. I'm going to get this sharing thing right this week. Oh, no, I'm not. Do you guys see my screen? No?
Nope.
Sweet. It's not letting me share. Hmm. Okay. Let's try it again. No, it's saying not today. All right. Well, this is going to make things a little bit more difficult. Because apparently I'm not the host. Wonder who the host is. Weird.
I was able to share it just a minute ago, and now I can't anymore. I don't know
You
if you
could
clicked
share?
in.
Oh, there we go. All
Ah,
right.
there you go.
Disaster averted. Okay.
Nice.
So, let's start with what being a prick stands for. All right. So, prick is first pressure, constantly pushing your team to the brink of unrealistic deadlines and expectations can lead to burnout and high turnover instead of setting achievable goals and providing support. So, let me give you a good example of this. Most owners are famous for thinking that they can do a lot more than what's realistic. Has anybody ever made that mistake? Okay. And adding pressure to the situation by pushing deadlines, really pushing deadlines that are unrealistic. Has anybody ever done that by mistake? No, never. Okay. Second thing is recognition. So again, recognition goes a very long way. All right. So failing to acknowledge your team's hard work and achievements can demotivate and disengage them. All right. So a good example of this is, we've got a brand new staff member. All right. We're praising them to keep them on board. Meanwhile, we're forgetting the guy that's been there 5 years and has to listen to you praising the new guy to keep them on board, which I see a lot. And we miss those little tiny opportunities to recognize the people that are truly there, truly helping. And it doesn't take much. Okay. Recognition, and a lot of times, will go much further than raises. Okay. Understanding again that this has to be distributed equally, it has to be distributed fairly, and it has to be honest and sincere. Okay. Um, Anybody ever had fake recognition handed out? Right, where that you can see it. I've been called out before on it, and it's worse than no recognition at all. Okay, so again, when we think about these things and when I'm showing you this system, the whole key principle here is to actually do a self-reflection. Look for these opportunities where you can recognize your staff in a sincere and honest way. Okay, so again, it's a system of recognition. All right. Second, isolation. All right, operating in a silo, not involving your team in decision making processes can make them feel undervalued and alienated. Foster inclusivity by encouraging collaboration and input from all levels. Okay, so again, a good example of living in a silo. All right, is when we put our staff away from decisions that affect them. All right. So a good example is the project manager changing, the crew's projects, moving them around, without giving them, an explanation or input into how that schedule is being built. Okay. So, leading like a dictator can oftentimes put your team in an isolation, or separating them, not asking for input can feel isolating. All
100%.
right. Um, Even being left out. So when decisions get made without them, that affect them, like I said, right? Um, and we want to make sure that we don't do the next thing, which is criticism. All right. So harsh, unconstructive criticism damages morale and confidence. Strive for constructive feedback that helps team members grow and improve. So my experience with criticism is oftentimes it's not intended to be, but ends up being criticism. All right. So a good example of this is you shoulda and you coulda. Okay. So you have a problem, and our leadership style is, you should have done this, or you could have done it this way, and we get into this situation where we think we're being supportive. We think that we're adding value, and we're not. All right. That's being perceived as peer criticism, where we have to really think about our language, our tone, and the situation that we're in. All right. So another great example of how this can be perceived as criticism is exactly when the situation happens. All right, we go right into this defense mode, or trying to put out a fire. Okay, and by marching in on those situations, we administer criticism to whoever we feel is the culprit behind it. Okay. I've done this. I think we all are guilty of doing it at one point or another. And again, it's not intentional. It's more non-intentional, but we don't take the moment to recognize that we've made that criticism, and we haven't taken the time to take someone aside and properly have this conversation with them. All right. So somebody makes a big mistake. We march in to put out the fire. All right. We lead with the you shoulda, you coulda. All right. And then we just leave it like that. How do you think your staff member is going to perceive that? How do you think they're leaving the table feeling? Do you think that they're motivated to not make that mistake again? No. Were you motivated? Right? Think back, even when your parents were scolding you, like think about those tones and the things they would say to you, even as a child going through school, right? How do we react and respond? Is it positive or negative? It's negative. Okay. We don't really get anywhere with that. So the better way to do that is, again, waiting till that moment has passed and separating and making a proper time to have a conversation and making sure that you have, a clear plan and steps in place that can prevent the problem from happening again. Getting their input, getting their feedback, asking them what they could have done better to make, to improve it. Again, I can't explain to you enough about how, being a coach rather than being a boss goes so much further. All right. Getting people to recognize their own mistakes and take accountability on their own, all right, is far better for them overall, better for the company, better for morale. All right. Helping them to recognize where the problems were and what they could do puts them in power. Okay. And you want empowered employees. You want empowered staff members. You want empowered subcontractors. What you don't want, okay, are people that are afraid to make mistakes around you. All right. They're afraid or they hide those mistakes from you. Okay. That leads to a lot of dependency. Okay. And we all don't want that, do we? Anybody had a really, really needy employee before? Right? Totally dependent on you, needed your,
No,
your blessing to do anything. Okay. What I challenge you to do is look back. At what point did they become that way, right? And was there a point where you stood in front of them, had some criticism towards what they were doing and they gave up, right? Or was there those moments? Okay. How empowered do they feel around you? Okay. That's a true sign of leadership. If you can take somebody again, that oh, what's that? Oh, okay. Um, and that should be our job. We should be coaching, empowering, getting our staff to feel a certain way where they actually take and are proactive to making sure problems don't occur. Otherwise, you're going to have a bunch of very dependent staff members that are generally unhappy with you. Okay, and all big decisions will come back to you. That's no fun leading a business like that. The last one, in don't be a prick, is kindness deficit. So a lack of empathy and understanding can create a hostile environment. All right. So the best way I can explain this, I'm in a predominantly male, pretty tough kind of business. All right. But I've learned long ago that, even roofers and, what we'll call it the cavemen of the industry. All right. There is a general lack of kindness towards them. All right. And how just having an understanding moment with somebody and not allowing your emotions to get involved and walking them through a problem and helping them, to connect with what's going on, all right, can go so much further um, than, being aggressive or, demanding things. Because a lot of times there's a reason that something's happening. And even your best guy, right? Are they immune from making mistakes? Are they in somehow supposed to be perfect? Right? How many of you guys have laughed about a big mistake that's been made? Anybody had the courage to do that? Made a joke of it? Okay. So you can set really, really good boundaries around kindness. All right. And again, it may not look like it's suiting to me to say kindness, but I mean more on the empathy side, right? If we're feeling any sort of triggered by a situation, the best thing for us to do is stand back before we say anything. All right. If you have a situation, a lot of times we open our mouths before we think. Okay. And then what happens next is we set off this chain reaction of misunderstandings, right? Especially in a heated moment. Okay. So I learned a long time ago, if I'm feeling upset, anger, if I'm feeling frustrated, then I know my whole team is. All right. I know everyone around me in some way or another is going to pick up on that. So the best thing for me to do, all right, is to shut my mouth, get myself back to an emotional balance, so a neutral position, all right, and think about what I'm going to say. Think about what I'm going to do next rather than allowing my emotions to take over and control the situation. Okay? Because a lot of times unkind things come out, maybe not intentionally, maybe intentionally, that do serious damage, both, short term and long term to your staff and to your long term employees. Has anybody had a complete meltdown in front of an employee? No, never raised your voice. I mean, I'm certainly guilty of it, especially when I was younger. I think that was how I led the first 10 years of my career, and it didn't work out very well. Okay. Is it okay, in your opinion, is it okay to have an emotional moment in front of an employee or staff member? Who's going to answer that one?
Not yelling.
Okay. I agree with not yelling. That's a personal sign of emotional intelligence, right? We don't need to yell. Um, but I'm going to say this: it's okay to show who you are, all right. And in some moments, again, that it is appropriate to show that you're a human being, okay. As long as that you're coming back to a point where you don't cross boundaries, okay. So boundaries being crossed, like Mario just pointed out, yelling. That's a boundary you should never cross. Okay, no one deserves to be yelled at. Okay, and I know that will probably come with some criticism. I can think of a few people in my own mind that I would say do deserve to be yelled at, but hold on. Give me one sec. I'll mute everybody. Okay. But again, coming back to that as a sign of emotional intelligence, and if you want a healthy business, okay, we've got to make sure that we're being the leaders, okay, and that we're calling out this kind of behavior in our staff. All right. So, has anybody here had a project manager or somebody on your team that was in the delegation side? All right, mistreat a subordinate? How many would actually know? So project manager, is shit talking the laborer. Who's had that situation?
I've I've
Yep.
had it where a foreman was too hard on apprentices. I lost
Hmm.
apprentices, Kevin.
I've had that too. It leads to high turnover, right?
Yeah,
Not
yeah.
supportive, not motivated. Obviously, again, here's a good saying: shit rolls downhill. All right. Don't let that be your business. Okay. Don't allow other people in your organization to cross those boundaries either. It starts with you first as the leader, you as the boss, right? You want to maintain an example of how people should be treated, but we want to take it one step further. All right. We want to make sure that we're actually training this stuff, that we're actually informing our staff and teaching our project managers, because you may very well know the value of this. All right. But if that's not being shown, or that's not being trained to the people below you that have to manage, field workers or subs, all right, I can almost guarantee you that these boundaries are being crossed. The reflection isn't throughout. Okay. And a lot of times what I found, especially as I, do this more and more, is that people just generally don't have a good idea of how to do it. All right. They don't have a way of looking at these things, through the proper lens, and they just take it as criticism on top of what you're saying, right? So, a good example of this, Greg, is, hey, stop swearing at the apprentice. Okay? How's that? How do you think that's perceived? Yeah, sure. In one ear, out the other. Right? Yeah, sure. I'll stop hazing the idiot, right? The other thing that we allow inadvertently is the gossip. Okay. So I have a very strong rule that we stand by. Anything that anybody says, including me, all right, you better have the courage and strength to say that right to the person that you're talking about's face. Okay, that's the rule. If you're going to say something, we're going to call you to task. If you've said something about someone, all right, you're going to stand in front of that person and say it out loud. All right, don't be saying anything, because that's not the world we live in. We don't accept that kind of behavior. All right, that's a boundary that doesn't get crossed. Okay. The reason I put that in place is, again, gossip is it can be a killer of morale. It can be a high reason for turnover, and it's just not necessary. Okay. So again, you as the leader set the rules to this game. All right. One of the rules should be, how do we control gossip? How do we control other people mistreating people, even if it's in fun, right? Even if it's joking, because most of the teasing and jokes are not always taken that way, right? And what's it end up happening? Somebody ends up, someone's feelings end up getting hurt, and next thing we're turning staff, okay, which is just completely unnecessary. So again, kind of coming back to what I'd like to see you guys do with this training today is educate. All right. Educate the people around you, educate your staff member, educate the laborers. All right. How should we be communicating with each other? And like, what is a way of making sure that everybody's being taken care of? And that we're not losing employees or staff or subcontractors to, misunderstandings or, silly things that just don't need to occur. All right. Anybody here worked in a toxic environment? Anybody had to be in a place maybe you had it in your own business?
I've worked in it with through the union whenever I was an
Oh,
apprentice and everything else. So, it's one thing that I try to get all my journeymen that I've worked with whenever we do training and stuff through the union to explain to them that, it's you want to treat them the way you want to be treated.
that's right.
Don't abuse your apprentices because number one, they're paying your retirement.
Hmm.
Um, but the biggest thing is, and I see it not just on the union side, but in the non-union side too. And we've been able to implement some of the training that we've been able to go through our company with that we've had advantages with the carpenters to
Hmm.
bring into our company and start making some changes and hopefully, you know, get everybody on the same page.
Totally. So, and I love that. So again, for me and having to deal with this problem, sort of for the better part of a decade now, and kind of, I think I've really got it under control at this stage. It comes down to really teaching a system. All right, is having people identify their own mistakes, and so that again, it becomes part of the culture. It becomes a part of the identity of the company. And again, for you guys out there looking to hire key players, having key people on your team, having long-term stable, executive level employees, right? Like think about the environment that you create. All right. Think about the culture that you want to have behind your business. And it's very simple on a day-to-day basis. All right. And by implementing a framework, all right, it allows everybody to have some power to control this. All right. So again, like I said, we teach this all the way from lead hand all the way down to labor because we want a system and a boundary set, all right, that says, hey, this is the way that we communicate with each other. So criticism, all right, it can be called out. Is that criticism or is that support? Right? We can address the kindness issue, right? So sometimes it's just the words you use, not the intent, but the words that are being used, right? So if you're calling somebody a name even in a joking way, all right, while giving them, some advice, that doesn't really come off so well to people, does it? Right? So we need to make sure that everybody understands what these friction points are and that we're all actively working to resolve any of them that do come up. Now, in terms of um, maintaining this, all right, we have another system that we use, the bark system, all right, and basically it's pretty simple. All right, so you see these two frameworks. First of all, we don't be a prick. That's step one. Step two, um, we want to make sure that we're getting buy-in. Okay, so buy-in super important, especially if you are a leader, you're foreman. Okay, having those discussions with your crew, like getting their buy-in, getting them to offer a piece so that everybody's included in making a decision or everybody's included in how the project progresses. Okay, again, this is super important and it's so easy to do. All right, now I'm not saying again that you don't have control of your jobs or anything like that, but there's always an opportunity to get your team to buy in. All right, using appreciation, you know making sure that we're recognizing the small wins and the improvements. Okay, that takes just as much energy, by the way, as criticizing somebody or writing them off, thinking that they're no good. Right, so take that into account for a second, like just that little bit of energy to appreciate what they are doing well, making sure that you're reminding yourself, even if you're in charge, of the improvements that they've made. Okay, I always like to start tough conversations with the things that I appreciate somebody's doing. Right, if I have to have a tough conversation with someone, I'm going to start with that. Okay, and I'm going to also try and make sure that we're having a proper calm conversation around what needs to change. All right, The relationship side of this. Okay. So again, tough to have this conversation sometimes within construction, especially within, different age groups and all the different gaps that we have in our culture. But relationship is still super important. Okay. And guess what? Everybody you work with and you yourself has to think of every employee, staff member, and everyone that's going to come in contact with your business as a relationship. Okay. The more that you can develop a relationship, and rather than just thinking of them as employees or staff members, all right, the further you're going to get, the more productive they are going to be. All right. The more we can work towards a common goal. And I think it's probably one of the most undervalued processes that just don't get done. Right. I have, I can give you a good example that, the owner that hasn't, doesn't know, his laborers' names, right? How do you think that comes across, right? One that's never had a conversation or talked to them. All right. This is all ultimately going to lead to culture, right? We want a drama-free culture. Anybody agree with that? Anybody really, looking to have a drama-free culture? Okay. What are the consequences of drama? Anybody?
Mistakes, bad moods.
Mm-hmm. Right. Would you say a lack of emotional intelligence?
Absolutely.
Right. So again, identifying those people within your organization that create drama, because there's natural people that just naturally do it really well. Okay. Identifying them, but more importantly, again, guys, this isn't about you rushing in and putting out the fire. Okay. This isn't about you having to deal with this and then having it come back on you. All right. This is about setting a system in place where it can be addressed and called out immediately. All right. So when someone's generating drama using gossip, again, crossing boundaries, teasing laborers, is that somebody you want to have in your organization? Is that somebody that you need to have? Okay. And what kind of damage do they do?
They drag others in there too.
Right. They lower productivity. One of the craziest things that I see a lot of is the guy that creates the most amount of drama somehow tends to be the closest with the owner, right? They put themselves in position or with you or with their foreman. All right. So they're always doing a gaslighting situation. I've seen it over and over and over again. I've had it happen in my own business. I'm very skeptical again at this stage of my game. I'm always looking and reflecting on, what the intent is behind someone's actions or someone sharing something with me, right? And again, it comes back to the rules I've set. Like anything you tell to me, I'm going to turn you right around and you're going to tell it to that person's face, right? So like, don't come in here and think that I'm keeping secrets for you, all right? Because everything is played open cards, all right? And you better think about what you say before you say it, because again, like I said, we have transparent communication. No one's no one's being spoke to behind their back. All right. Great way to lose top guys, because good guys don't bring drama, right? Is that not what we're looking for here? Drama free guys, people that just come, do their job, and happily go home. Who would appreciate that? Who could see their business running smoother? Great. Awesome. Right. So teach that to your team. Make sure that those things that are creating drama or allowing somebody to have a platform for drama are eliminated. Okay. Because just like I said, the person that's going to gaslight is also the person that doesn't want the spotlight when they get caught doing it. Right. Best way to weed that out. Make sure that everybody has the power to call that out openly, and you will see it go away very quickly. Okay. Gerald.
One thing I wanted to add to that, as far as this drama and stuff goes, we run into that quite a bit, and especially when we're getting onto the subject of the culture too, especially down here where we're from, around Chattanooga.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we tend to have to learn to deal with a lot of that. But the one thing I tell people is, what reaction, whether it's on a commercial job, whether it's on a residential job, if the owner of the project or the owners of the the plant or whatever are there, what kind of demeanor is that giving off for the company? What is that leaving the owner or the manager of that project, whoever's over that project? Hey, do we want to hire those guys anymore? So that's
Right.
one of the things that I try to bring up to my guys on a regular basis.
Totally, totally. So, and again, you just have to think about it this way, right? Like everybody has a presence, right? Being on a crew, being in an office, everybody's, especially if you're working very closely. And how many of you guys have been in stressful situations and somebody's adding to that stress, making things worse? Like again, looking at that personality type, right? I've had plenty of those guys, where they pick up on something that isn't perfect, and then all of a sudden it becomes, a bitch fest about that. What's that do to the rest of the team? What's that do to morale? What's that do, to productivity? Everything just drops, right? So again, like I'm saying, the key here is training. Get this out in the open. Make sure that we're talking about what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. Getting your team to buy into this. All right. What don't they like? What are they insulted by? What tones and languages are we using that are affecting our top employees? Right? Is it us personally, number one? Can we reflect and see how we can improve? Absolutely. Right. And then that has a trickle down effect. You're setting the culture in your business. If you don't want drama, you don't want gossip, you don't want high turnover, again, like I said, the first step is a reflection of yourself. Make sure that you're not actually doing those things. All right. Second to that, make sure that we have a process in place. Again, we're having discussions around what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. You're letting your team set certain boundaries in this system, and I've given you guys an actual playbook for this. Again, where we can kind of go through it. All right, but again, teaching people to actually, go through this framework and apply it, right? Especially managers, anybody that's involved in delegating tasks, anybody that's seen as senior, okay? They're usually, and I hate to say it, but they're usually the first source that I see that is the culprits, right? We've got a guy that's been there forever, all right? And again, to your face, he may be, the nicest guy and you can't live without him, the best employee. Turn your back and all of a sudden he's shitting on everybody, right? I've had that personally. They do a Jekyll and Hyde on you, and the damage it does and the reflection of you is just like they're not there as team players. All right. Now, if no one else has a voice, what happens? What do you think happens? People just quietly quit. They just leave, right? Next thing you're doing is turning over people. And the worst part is you think you can't live without that employee. That's the worst part. And meanwhile, he's the one inflicting all the pain and the damage. Okay. So we got to watch out for these things. And that's why I'm saying to contribute and to teach this as a culture thing to your business, right? Having them buy in. And I've given you some examples of this. Um, you know, again, little things, little touches, right? Showing appreciation, making sure that it's distributed evenly to all of your employees and staff, making sure that your managers are actively doing it, right? Keeping evaluation scores is another great way. Again, to make it genuine, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But how we can actually do this systematically. All right. Um, if we're looking at these four quadrants, and in this workbook, guys, again, I want you to use it and make your own examples of it. I've given you, examples that you can apply. But the best thing is to sit down with your team and have them give you examples based on this. Come up with these things as a team. Best 45 minutes you're going to spend. Okay. Why is it so important? All right. And we may not value it, and you may think your guys don't want to do it. And some of them may not want to do it. All right. But what it does is it gets things out in the open. Okay. Now we're discussing things that are actually causing the turnover, that are actually causing people to quit and to leave your business. All right. And you'd be very surprised at how interactive and involved this kind of training can become. Again, I've ran it many times in my own business and in other people's business, and it's always very interesting how we interact when we're actually addressing real problems, real issues. Okay. And then again, like I said, coming up with this framework, isn't you going down and dictating it to them, isn't you coming down and saying do this or do that. It's actually the opposite. It's like, hey guys, let's set the culture together, right? What should be the boundary around appreciation, right? What is considered criticism, unnecessary criticism? All right. How do we call that out? How do we fairly say, that you've crossed the boundary? Right. Teaching people to communicate with each other is going to take your business to the next level. Simply for the matter is it's going to allow you to bring in really, really great people that love the culture, love the place that they work, and people are talking openly. And listen, likes attract likes, right? You get guys here, again, even I have a few that are, I'm going to say, have gone through our counseling therapy and have become champions of this that would be otherwise deemed as drama queens. But they recognize, hey, you know what? There's the boundary. We've talked about it, and their behavior's changed. All right. So I've avoided two problems. One, either getting rid of them or having them, push other people out. Right. It's just not necessary. But if you're not giving them a system to use or a boundary to play by, what ends up happening is it becomes useless conversation. Right. Those boundaries get crossed again and again. No one takes it seriously. Right. Especially if you're just dictating. So I'm going to shut up for a second. I want to hear your feedback. What comes to mind when I'm talking about a system around, managing employees? What was that? Was that what you guys were thinking when we were talking about how not to lose your key employees? Probably not.
On this, what I was thinking is even on work site, there's sort of banter sometimes
Mhm.
going on, and that can be helpful or not helpful. How have you, or would you handle when you have a different language
Oh,
is
that's
being spoken on the site? So what can happen then is you can have someone who speaks English only, and they hear other languages, and they feel like they're kind of out of the loop. Or are they talking about them or this type of
Mhm.
thing, right?
So again, that's a wicked question. I'm so glad you asked that. Again, I have multicultures in our business. Um, it's still universally taught. Okay. So at the end of the day, you can't stop if somebody has a language barrier. And like you are always going to assume if someone's speaking in another language that they're talking about you. That's what's going to happen. Right. So having the discussion around it and having, again, if you have a foreman, for example, that's English speaking and you have a Spanish crew, all right, talking to them about how to communicate, talking to them about, again, the type of engagements. And this is universal. Like I said, you can still, have, a proper system in place amongst, let's say the Spanish speaking, but also, how are we supposed to address each other, foreman to crew leader, right? So again, we can't really stop the fact that, we have that language barrier, but what we can do is making sure that they are still aware of what the expectations are and what the boundary lines are, right? So, and you want, like, as long as you're getting their buy-in and feedback and you're giving somebody a voice, you know what, you're always going to get a better result than our traditional discipline systems, right? Because it's hard to discipline this stuff. It's very difficult, right? How do you judge which is fair and what is not? And what you might be offended by, maybe the next guy is not, right? So is that a boundary? You see the problem here, right? It shouldn't be your boundaries. It should be set by the team, right? It should be, bought in on and discussed. Like what is the okay example of banter, right? When have we gone too far, right? And let's say that somebody is like, where are we picking up on that, right? There's always those guys on crews that like to push and give guys a hard time. All right. They may not mean to insult them and, they're still valued team members, but there's got to be, still a way of showing that person that they're still appreciated, that they're still like, it is joking. And I find that goes really, really far as well. And just pulling people back, right? So again, a foreman knows how to pull back, somebody that's gone too far with the teasing, right? What do they have to do next? How do they make that person they're teasing come back and feel appreciated. Does this make sense? Right? So again, the whole purpose of this, guys, is first of all for you to use it, all right, and for you to recognize what the friction points are. But the real system part here is teaching it to your culture so that you don't have to be the referee. You don't have to be the babysitter. Okay? Have you ever had two crews that refuse to work near each other, or two people that refuse to work near each other? I don't think you've been in business if you haven't. Okay? Wouldn't it be nicer to just have them work that shit out themselves? Okay? How many of you guys felt pulled into these arguments or disagreements before? Okay? And is that where your head should be? No, doesn't pay very many bills, babysitting or refereeing, does it? Okay? So this is where you use this again to be the coach, to keep yourself in neutral position. All right. And again, it's not a deflection. All right. It's a system, and you force them to go through it. Right. You force them to use it. You remind them of what they've already agreed to when they bought in on it. Right. So this is especially good when people are coming into your business, that you teach this method. And does anybody think this is complicated? Right? Pretty simple. Again, it goes into your core values that you should be upfront with, right? If your core values is integrity, all right, this flows perfectly into it, right? How do we maintain integrity? We think about what we say before we say it. Simple as that, right? If you're going to say something, you best be able to say it to whoever you're speaking of, right? Simple as that. That's integrity, is it not? Okay. Pretty easy to maintain that, right? Now, not so easy to get between two guys feuding, though, is it? And again, if you think of where you've put yourself in that position, there's no winning side for you. Right. So again, like I said, to avoid those problems and to stomp out some of the silly things that happen and the unnecessary things and the things that actually cost you employees, it's better to have these things in and set up and have those discussions. And that way it keeps you out of the weeds and out of the position of referee. Right. And that's the worst spot to be in. No one wants the drama. I'm too busy to do that. And I'm not a therapist either. Right. Okay. Anybody else have any feedback? Anybody else have any questions about what this is and how to apply it? Okay. All right. So I want to talk about another key issue. We have about 10 minutes here. I'm going to briefly touch upon it. I also have a really wicked guide for this, and maybe this could be a whole conversation on its own. Maybe we'll do a separate training. But what's an effective evaluation? Okay. When are they done? When are they actually useful and practical? Okay. So this is going to apply to bringing people in, new employees especially, all right, and bringing them into a system and a culture where we can give constructive feedback and it's actually meaningful. Okay. Again, like I said, the worst thing you can do is praise somebody that is not performing well in front of their, project manager who is doing all the work, right? Who is babysitting. The worst thing you can do as an owner is take an uneducated stance and praise, somebody that doesn't deserve it. Okay. I'm a big fan of, keeping information and data. All right. But that's a cultural thing as well. All right. So again, when we evaluate, how are those evaluations being done? And where are the bias? And when's the appropriate time that you can do this and build this into, your BARC system, right? So let's talk about a new employee, somebody that's joining your organization. When should we be evaluating them? Anybody?
Well, I have a guy who started yesterday. Would you like to talk about my quick plan?
Perfect. Let's do it.
Next week, at the end of actually, I followed up with him yesterday at the end of the day.
Okay.
I intend to follow up with him at the end of tomorrow.
Mhm.
And these are casual. We're
Okay.
sitting down together midweek next week at the 1 week mark. We already sat down and talked about his career pathing, what his goals are. Again, very casual, but wrote it down. And then I plan on doing that again in a month. and then
Okay.
the 90-day.
Okay. So when we're thinking about evaluations, I want to give you, my 2 cents in on this. Evaluations are only good if everybody involved appreciates the metric. Okay. So one of the best ways, and I think I've taught you guys this with the trial offers and stuff like that, is if a metric is not respected by the person being evaluated, the evaluation has just become a criticism. Okay. It's just become something that is not appreciated. All right. And it can be misunderstood or misperceived. You're not actually giving them a pathway to get them from point A to point B. In fact, you're putting up barriers with your evaluation. You're shutting doors with your evaluation. So here's the method I like to use and what I like to start off with. So taking a brand new employee, I have a certain expectation, all right, and that's going to be attached to a role that they've agreed to play for me. Okay, now that role should be a role first that you find a person to match. That's the first step. Okay, now the evaluation part comes in is when you both mutually agree on the expectations and that there's a clear pathway for them to meet that expectation. Okay, so when I'm saying clear a pathway, I mean simple milestones. Hey, by the end of this week, what would be awesome is if you could do X, Y, and Z. You would meet my expectation. All right. And then I'm going to evaluate and get their buy-in. Do you think you could do that without any issues? What would you need from me to achieve that? Because I want to see you do that. I want to see you meet my expectation. I want to see you, again, advance as quickly as I can. All right. What would you need from me? Okay. So do you see what I'm doing? Buy-in. Right. I'm not coming down and saying you have to do this, this, and this. I'm asking, hey, here's the big audacious goal up here. All right. You tell me how we're going to get there. You tell me what you can do that contribute to that. And then we're going to have a conversation in the timeline that we've agreed to, you and I mutually, if you did it, yes or no. Does that seem fair to you? Okay. You will see an immediate different shift in people's beliefs, even in you and your leadership. Because again, people want to work as a team. People want to work in a collaboration. Very few people exist in our culture that are not collaborative and don't want to work together. Like, so again, if we build a system like that where people feel valued, they feel like they're actually working towards something, even short term, long term, you put it anywhere, and then you just keep score of that for them. All right, the whole culture will shift. The whole objectives will shift. Okay, and you won't have to feel as a manager. Okay, you won't have to feel like the bad guy all the time. Okay, it's a great way to build relationship as well because again you're not trying to force upon them an unrealistic you know um expectation. You're trying to get them to buy into the expectation. You're trying to get them to buy into the belief, right? Buy into where you're going. And guess what, a beautiful thing happens during that period. Number one, the first thing you will notice is you have less needy employees and staff members that require you to do all the thinking. Okay. You're going to have people that are thinking and problem solving for themselves. Why? You set the tone right off the bat. You gave them a problem to solve. All right. You gave them the tools. You gave them the asset. Now, whether the right answer, that's not your, like, in my opinion, that's not your place to give it. All right. You got to let people think for themselves. If you have people in your business that can't think for themselves, you are limited in scale. All right. You're not really developing anybody. Okay. So again, like I said, valuation comes into play there. Where else can we use evaluation? I'll give you a couple of clues.
You don't want to do it near your year end.
Okay. And what would be the importance of a year end?
So we have it set up in our thing for this year coming up that everybody's going to have their annual review at our year end versus me having to constantly remember when everybody's start date was. And this helps us with our budgeting and forecasting for potential increases and career pathing. So that's why we did it this way.
Okay, so I want you to do something different this year. All right, just a slight change. I want you to ask whoever is up for raises in the year end to give you a self-evaluation. Have them tell you how they think they performed, what they did, what
So
they contributed. All
that's
right.
how
So
yeah,
yeah.
they do
So
a self, we do a manager, and then we blend them into
yeah.
goals.
So again, in terms of if you have come up with a clear plan, a pathway, right? So I always include a like when someone starts with me, it's a 90-day plan. All right. Now that's a 50-50 agreement, right? So I give the big objective, they give me the key results, right? So I've got the objective of you will be able to work independently without anybody's, anybody getting involved. Let's just say, for example, for a project manager, right? You'll be able to run the systems. You'll be able to do X, Y, and Z right from the job description they signed up for. Okay. Now you're going to tell me how you're going to do those things and what support you need. Okay. That's going to be our plan. We're going to work that together. Okay. At the end of the 90 days, it's yes, you did, or no, you didn't, or the end of the 2 weeks, whatever trial you're giving them. Okay. Black and white. I'm not as big of a fan as scoring like 1 to 5, 1 to 10. I don't feel like I think a lot of bias gets involved there. I think you need to work more towards black and white. Leave no gray area. It's either you did or you didn't, right? And if you didn't, then possibly there's a reason. Okay. But then when we get, where we've had people for a period of time, okay, to have evaluations still be effective, it has to involve them. They have to have some skin in the game. They have to appreciate the evaluation. All right. If they look at it as a drag or a way to get a pay raise, the worst you can do. Okay. Because now we're just doing it out of, and again, for me, I'm not a fan of doing them at the end of the year or at Christmas. I don't feel like that's appropriate, only because, again, that mixes in with bonuses and people in general, from my experience, like I've lost more employees because of bonuses that were given without merit than I have in any other thing that I've done. All right. Gifts and giveaways, not a good idea. All right. You're creating dependency. All right. You're creating charity. It has to be tied directly to, outcomes. It has to be tied directly to them achieving something, within the organization, in my opinion, to get those things, right? So again, be careful around that. But I feel the best time for the year-end evaluations is in September. I don't know why. That's my jam month. Okay. That's also when we're going into a full productivity. So from September basically till Christmas is like a really, really crunch time where most companies they ignore evaluate. They don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to stir the pot, right? So we avoid those what I would call my year end, because I do them annually. With some of my older staff, we do them, quarterly with newer ones. But I'm going to stage mine in September, and we're going to have a discussion, and we're going to look out over this next period. All right. That way, when I get to Christmas and everyone's expecting bonuses, what do we have? Right. The best is when they've come to you and they do that evaluation of whether they've got they've achieved their objectives and goals within your company. All right. When they can actually be honest. All right. The sign of you doing this very well is when they come to you disappointed. Sometimes they come to you ecstatic, but like it's genuine. Okay. I can't express that enough. When there's such a clear card, and it doesn't have to be complicated. Like nothing I'm explaining to you guys, don't overcomplicate this shit. All right. It should be 5 or 6 things. Black and white, yes or no. All right. It could be short as one piece of paper. All right, that they've held on to. The more complicated you make it, the less likely that they're absorbing in it, that they are bought into it. Okay. And I'm going to recommend this. It should be at minimum 50% their targets, their objectives. Okay. 50% of them, not you. Okay. Do you want to see real results? You want to see, again, you want to live by the system I'm teaching you. Okay. The pressure should be in the right place. Okay. If they didn't have any say in these targets or these objectives you set, I can promise you're going to be disappointed quite often. Okay. On the other hand, if they've contributed to it, and they're coming to you with their, you know, their shoulders high and their head high because they've achieved all those things. You're going to feel a lot more, a lot better about those bonuses, aren't you? Right? And are we celebrating as a team collaboratively? Does anyone feel judged? No. Okay. And like I said, is it more complicated? It's actually easier. It's much easier. Okay. Again, think about it this way. If somebody's truly a high achiever, somebody's truly trying to grow within your business, and you've given them the pathway to call their own play, all right, with guidelines, of course, right? Again, we're guiding the ship, but we're not steering it. All right. We're letting them tell us what they can contribute. And then all we're doing is having the discussion with them. Okay. You'll see enormous growth in people. All right. They'll feel like you care. They're going to feel like like this mattered. Okay. And again, it's going to be a hell of a lot easier than trying to go through a 1 to 10, 100 questions, all these things that, they weren't even paying attention to. Right. Okay. Anybody have any takeaways from what I just said? Because it's really simple, but it can come off as a lot, right? To some people, it can be a lot. I don't want you doing a lot. If this feels like a lot of work, you have to question if you're doing it with the right intent. Okay, this isn't something you're going to um, overdevelop. Should be the term. Okay, these should be discussions brought to life on paper. Again, we're going to talk about 4 or 5 things that I want them to grow in, that they want to grow into, that they can achieve. We're going to get those in writing, and we're going to keep it simple. Why on one side and on the other side. There's your evaluation. Right? They come to you with that evaluation before Christmas, and they they get to share it, right? You just give it back to them. You can put it in an automatic email. Right? Here's where you were. Okay. Now, I'll be honest, most people genuinely forget most of the conversation. All right. But it's very, very funny what happens when it's been written down and then they get this to reflect back on. And all of a sudden, like, I don't know if it's subconsciously, I don't know what happens, but like most of the time, they get pretty damn close. All right. They do get quite a few things, even if it was subconscious to them. It's because you guys set those goals together. You set those objectives. You set that tone, and that's much easier to digest. Right. That's much easier for them to remember and to recognize. And again, you'll see a lot more growth happening. Does this make sense? Okay. Who thinks it could be easier than what they're currently doing? Okay. So in this, you guys, I've given you like all the steps for putting this together. Again, like I said, even this, I would use as just a guide. Okay. So what I'm sharing with you in the SOP, use it as a guide. Try to keep it simple. Try to keep it, on par with their plan and where they could end up in your business. All right. And you'll see incredible results. Okay. So that is my lesson for today. What I'd like to do is open the floor see if anybody has any questions that they'd like me to answer about anything that I've discussed today.
Do you do a group session and then a one-on-one session separately, or?
Yeah, so again, that can be variable depending on your company structure. All right. So first step, no matter what, before you put any evaluation systems or anything in play, okay, the tendency is to overthink and overanalyze it and come out with like, again, the best example I can share with you is like a big corporate, like archaic evaluation form and like 100 questions on it, like all these things that have to be judged that no one even read, right? Like that's the wrong way. So my suggestion to you is, first of all, think about implementing systems that don't involve you, right? Setting boundaries, making sure that people are following us like a system, all right, where they feel like the little things that we've talked about aren't happening. All right. Second to this, in setting up your evaluation, it starts day one, right? So the day that they start with you, okay, or in the interview process where you agree to a 2-week trial period, you're going to train them in how to do this, okay? Does that make sense? So they, again, the telltale sign of this working very good is when people look forward to those evaluations, right? When it's on their calendar and they're reminding you, right? Like they're looking forward to it. And not just for financial reasons, right? Genuinely to have that discussion. Okay. So day one, when they come in, you set that expectation together, right? You know what the results are. It's on your job description. Okay. You come up with a plan with them. All right. Should be 4 or 5 things. All right. That they're going to do in the next 2 weeks or 3 months, okay, that they're committing to you for, and maybe you have commitments to them as well. Okay, that can go both ways. And all we're going to do is then put that in our calendar, all right, for the next time we agreed to meet. All right, that's going to go on both of our calendars automatically. And we're going to put that form we just made into the calendar. All right. And that's going to go out a week before that evaluation as a reminder. And guess what? We're just going to show up. Right. If you decide to do these annually or semi-annually, no stress about that, is there? Right? Not a ton of work. We're just checking in. Right? We're making sure we're on course together. All right. And then in that conversation, if they've achieved what you had expected and they're progressing, okay, now we make a new plan. Right? We set new targets. We have new objectives that they want to achieve within the business. Again, you're letting them buy in. You're letting them tell you, right? A lot easier. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Who else has questions around this process?
There's a question in the chat there, Jay.
I don't know if I can. Oh, yeah, not being a prick system. Sorry, my chat's all over the place.
From Gerald about generational gaps.
Oh, this is okay. I'm glad you asked this. We all have those, right? There is a difference now where younger generation seems okay. So here's my 2 cents on this. And again, I kind of got a good eye on this. So who can agree here that we have a difference in value systems between, let's say, a baby boomer or a Gen Xer and a millennial?
Absolutely.
Okay. So let me give you my 2 cents. The difference is a baby boomer and Gen Xer were brought up in the shut up and work era, okay, where there wasn't a lot of collaboration, okay, and it was work hard and you get somewhere, okay. That's what their mentality is. So they work first, then they get an opportunity. And then what happened is that got flipped in the millennial group, seeing that we entered the post-trust era, all right, where they could see visibly that their parents didn't get, far. They went to school and didn't get, the $1 million job, and we were let down on so many different fronts that now what millennials and the generations below look for: show me an opportunity and then I'll work. All right. So those two things, all right, fight against each other. So again, it's like driving with the brakes on. I see it over and over and over again. So what you have to do, all right, is bring that out into the open space. Explain to people why they're feeling a certain way, and make sure that, again, we're accepting certain types of boundaries, even if you don't necessarily appreciate the younger generation, and that's fine. That's acceptable. Listen, you have a different value system. There's going to be some things that you're not comfortable with, but we don't cross boundaries. We don't talk down to someone because we don't agree with their value system. All right. And most of the time, just bringing it up and pointing it out is all it takes. They laugh about it. They recognize. The other thing too, guys, that you want to do to kind of bridge this: personality profiles. Have them sit down and read their personality profiles to each other. Okay. I've done this a million times. Okay. I use a 16 personality thing where they read out their personalities. In there, it says the things they're good at, they're bad at, what to watch out for. And everybody's aware of it. And they have these aha moments that, hey, you know what? That guy's not trying to be a prick. He's not trying to be, tell me, to try and control me. That's just his personality. Like that's part of his character, right? And then they also begin to realize other little things about each other, and it stops being dramatic, right? So the problem with those two generations is that once there's conflict, all right, it's very hard to back down either side. All right. And what tends to happen is both of them just shut down towards each other, and then you get silence. And that's pure dysfunction of a team. Right. So again, it's all about communicating here and accepting, hey, you know what? It's perfectly fine and perfectly normal if, the 60-year-old, baby boomer doesn't necessarily like, the brand new Gen X laborer. All right. That's okay as long as he's going to respect and show respect to him at all times, not crossing those boundaries we've set and not affect our culture, then you're free to think whatever way you want. Did that answer your question?
Jay, the biggest thing is that we're having to overcome, and that's one of the I wanted to get some input on it. Is like you said, we've got a lot of the baby boomers, which they're most of them are starting to retire out, but
Mhm.
still, what the and I hate forgive me for saying it this way, guys, but that they've come to the mentality of with the especially with the younger generation. What I keep trying to tell them is don't be a shithead, and because
Mhm.
your apprentices are trying to do what they know to do, but the problem that keeps coming back around is goes back to what you were saying of is there's the kids, a lot of them, the younger generation that I'm seeing nowadays
Mhm.
is more or less they're expecting to be born with a silver spoon and they're not willing to put into the work. I don't know if anybody else is having any of that problems like we are or not.
So I want you to really analyze that for a second because I'm going to point something out to you that I've observed, and again I get the privilege of looking at lots of different companies. Is what you're observing there is not necessarily that they won't work because guess what? At the end of the day, I hate to say it, and like it's not my facts, but like the productivity between the baby boomers and millennials is the millennials actually are more productive. All right. And here's why they're more collaborative. Look at the education system shift that occurred, right? They're taught to be collaborative. We're all like, if you're in that millennial group, like everything down is all about working collaboratively. It's all about working in groups. Whereas the education system prior to that taught, again, individual results, individual things. And we've seen a lot of that. Well, again, if you're looking at, even the way our complicated projects are running or how project management has shifted and changed, you're going to see it's all about collaboration, is it not? Right? So what's happening there is again, we're not recognizing the first issue, right? Millennials and the younger generation, they will work. Okay. They will go after a target or goal, but it's not the way they're not motivated the same way we were. And I'll say it, I'm more on the Gen X side, but like I was brought into a system where it was shut up and work, or I'm going to throw this hatchet at you. Right. Like
Uh-huh.
that was, and if you got to be tough to work, right? Like if you want to be here and like, again, I just went along with it and being very young and naive, like I thought that's just how things were. That's toxic. It led to more accidents, it led to more suicides, it led to like it wasn't effective and it wasn't productive. Okay. The guy that went out and worked 7 days a week, it's been proven that it's not more productive. It's less productive. Okay. So then what you're observing on the other hand, and again, it's not about who's right or who's wrong. All right. But on the other hand, you're looking at a millennial coming into this going, well, this isn't what I expected. Right? This is what I was told, right? This isn't what I was taught in school. Like this doesn't look right. And you've got a bunch of older guys that are just like, well, he doesn't want to work. But what opportunity does he have? Like, think about it. Like, I don't want to just come in and be miserable like this guy, right? Like, I got the next 40 years to just do the same thing? Like, that doesn't motivate, right? And then again, they become isolated, right? All the things I'm talking about, like don't be a prick, is exactly where the friction comes, right? They isolate them. They assume they don't want to work. They don't give them anything to be motivated by. They give them, you know, again, they're just talking down to them, right? Like they pick up on that pretty quickly. So that is the gap. And again, it is starting to improve. It's starting, I'm seeing, some big shifts in my business. I don't have anybody over the age of 40, right? And we've been that way for quite a while now. And again, like I said, we're on a 4-day work week, right? I never thought we would be on that. Yeah, like they value different things, right? Where the baby boomers and the other guys want to work 7 days a week. It's not more productive. You don't get more done, right, than the guy that was working 4 days a week.
Yeah,
So
I agree. I do agree with that. I guess the biggest thing is see we have to deal with a lot of the generational stuff
totally.
here, and the biggest thing is see I'm 53, so I was
Mhm.
brought up in a whole different generation.
Totally.
If you don't get to work, you're gonna wear the 2x4. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
But the thing is we're trying to figure out. But I also lay back now. This is just something I want to kick out there and see if anybody else has got any opinions on. But when I was growing up, everything was go to college, learn the computer programming, so on and so forth.
Hmm.
That was what the number one thing is. Well, now everybody's into the computers. Now we got the AI generation coming up and all that stuff. But yet, on the other hand, we're starting to have a issue, especially down here in the South, with people not going into the actual workforce or starting to do that. So we're starting to get a lot of the younger generation. I mean, my son's 22 and I want to wring his neck sometimes because it's just like they've got a whole lot different work ethics than what I was brought up to, and that's been one of our biggest issues that I've been trying to overcome, and especially overcome with some of my older journeymen and superintendents.
Hmm.
So that's why I asked the question.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'd love to anybody to have any sort of input on it. I mean, it's a hot topic. It's going to be funny though. You mark my words. We're coming around full circle because of all the AI and the jobs being lost, and like the the lie that was said that you have to go to college, and like if you didn't go to college, like again, the stigma still exists. Like if I was a construction worker, I still remember it, when I was in high school. If I was, a roofer, that I was somehow less. But I mean, at the time I was making more than, our counselor that was giving me that advice that I had to go to college. And so it was very confusing. All right. And it was looked down upon to work in the trades. I think that that's shifting now. And we're going to see an enormous shift coming where all of a sudden the hottest jobs are going to be in the trades, because where else are you going to make the money? Right.
Exactly, exactly.
So,
And I think that it is coming,
mhm.
but the thing is, the hardest part is going to be for us as company owners and managers will be to try to learn how to deal with the upcoming generation and how to move forward on everything.
it,
And that's the biggest hurdle that I see
it,
right now because the money's there. It's
yeah.
just get out and do it.
It's shedding your own trauma, right? So like again, I feel like the way I came into roofing, and like I mean, no one inspires, like no one wakes up one day and it's like, I can't wait to be a roofer, right? Like you get there for reasons, most cases it's not like electricians or plumbers, right? So I seen really the ugliest side of the trades, right? Where people literally can't, like that's what they have to do for whatever reason. Okay. The one thing that I can say honestly is, as an owner, all right, I spent a decade trying to lead like a like I was taught, right? Like again, abusive, just shut up. Like I didn't want to hear, like, and it got me nowhere. All right. The second that I recognized that just because I came into that environment and I was taught that that's the way you do it, doesn't mean it's right. Doesn't mean it's effective. It doesn't mean it's productive, right? So what I had to do, to kind of get over this is really look at the core of the problem. And a lot of it is to do with, again, how we were educated, right? Like, so let me give you a good example. All right. The Gen Xers and baby boomers are anti-training anything. You can't even get them to go to a safety course, nothing. Like they're not learning nothing. They're not doing none of that, right? It's like pulling teeth. On the other hand, you offer that to your younger generation. It's not just a novelty. It's expected, right? The education system taught us this. Like you're supposed to, and they will take you up on that training. They're going to do those things. They're looking to improve. Now, here's the fun part: you put them together. You put your younger generation together to come up and solve a problem, a big problem. All right, 9 times out of ten, they're gonna impress you. All right,
Yeah,
it's the collaboration side that we're missing, and we're presuming that's laziness or not. But what would you do if, again, we just flipped your whole, like, let me give you it on the other hand. If you came into an environment where everyone was trying to collaborate when you started in the trades, right? There was full training, and there was, all of this onboarding and teaching culture, and, like, having the discussions we're having today. What would be different in the way that you presume, the trades being now? What would change?
Well, I mean, if we'd have tackled this and started looking at this years ago and trying to get ahead of where we're at, and I'm talking about every trade as a whole.
Hmm.
And I really became aware of it when I started teaching just a few just a few years, about 7 or 8 years ago,
Hmm.
in the trades. Um, One of the things that I think that really, if we would have tackled that, if they would have been more aware of it back
Hmm.
whenever I was growing up, because like I said, most of us probably grew up at a different time,
Hmm.
but the world's changing every day. So I think that if we can all come together and start trying to correct some of the problems that we have created,
Hmm.
and especially I put a comment up earlier where when I worked for TVA, the number one saying that they've got is chaos creates cash. And
Oh, wow.
that's one of the biggest issues that I've got, because yes, chaos does create cash, but it also creates losses for the company.
Hmm.
And that's one of the things that I try to start teaching our apprentices now is you've got to get away from some of the older stuff. You guys are on, they're on the right path. I mean, I've
Hmm.
seen more of the younger kids. I could put three of the younger kids on my crew that are sitting there trying to figure out, and that's one thing about it. They'll look it up. If they don't know how to
Yeah.
cut a
They're-
rafter, or they've got a problem, they're going to look it up on Google, you
Right.
know. But
Right.
um, but yeah, I do agree with that, and I hope I'm not putting too much input, but I hope I'm able to try to help
No, this
somebody. I'm
is
also open for opinions too.
yeah, this is a great conversation. It's relevant to what everybody's experiencing. And again, I want everyone to think of when we go back the opposite way, because like I said, AI is going to take certain jobs that are, the writing's on the wall. Okay. And here's the thing, guys, is like there was an entire generation that was sold on going to school. My generation was too. Like I felt like I was made to feel like I would be a failure if I didn't go in and get a university education. Now, the ironic side of that is I have friends. Well, when I was 35, I'm a little bit older than that now, but I have friends that were still paying back their student loan at 35 years old. Okay. B- like, and they didn't even get into the field of work that they went to school for, right? So now we have this all coming around full circle. The difference now is the trades wasn't attractive. It wasn't a place that you would go because you wanted to. It wasn't something you were trying to advance. A lot of us got put in it for other reasons, right? I mean, I could speak on behalf of roofing. Like I said, it's not something that someone truly inspires to be, right? In most cases. There might be some exceptions. But what I learned from all of that, and what I've come to experience is, again, before we're putting labels on anybody, like what kind of experience did we have? Right? How were we brought into it? And is that the right way? Was that the right way to do it? And does it make it better for the future? So, like, again, as employers, as spokesmen for our trade, all right, are you proud of what the environment is now? Right? Probably not. Right? Could there be a better way? Absolutely. Why does McDonald's not have a problem finding staff and members? Like, look what they pay, right? Why would people rather go work at McDonald's than get a job in the trades? Anybody answer me that? Why don't they have huge, labor crisis? The trades pays double to triple to what they're paying. They don't have any labor issues,
No
right?
stress. Easy systems.
Right? Easy systems.
Mhm.
Again, they're brought into a collaborative environment like they were taught in school. All right. There's expectations, there's ways to move up. Like, again, does that happen in a small contracting business? Is there anything like that exists? Most of the time, no. Is it even exist in these unions? No. Right? It's a bureaucracy in most of these unions, right? So, like, Again, is that environment that is attractive to somebody that's smart, eager, willing to work, or is that just a last ditch resort till they find something better? Right. So the cool thing is, as owners, we get to change that, right? That's all up to you. And it starts with little things like we're talking about today, right?
Okay, and I'm gonna let everybody else, but I've got one more question to kind
Sure.
of throw a monkey wrench in everything.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Another issue that we have been seeing around here, and it's like we said, it's times of the changing. Um, I've run into this multiple times because, you know, we're pretty much USA is a melting pot, and we've got
Mm-hmm.
some that's been coming in from different religious backgrounds.
Yep.
So where they've got so many hours a day that they've got to spend, and that's one of the big issues that we've been having with some of our elders,
Mm-hmm.
if you understand what I'm saying,
I
because
do.
they've got to spend so many hours each day doing their religious thing, and that's one of the things that we've been dealing with as a company and as a whole. And I don't know if anybody else has had that issue, but how do you overcome that?
I've had that issue personally myself. Um, Again, we continue to have it's. I wouldn't even call it an issue at this point. One thing that we had to do in order to overcome the first thing is the judgment, right? So you remember me saying, like, don't say anything you're not willing to say to somebody's face, right? Like, again, that's universal. That's understood. So for us, clear setting the clear expectations. I don't care if you want to pray 30 times a day or do whatever. But here's the expectation. Here's what everybody else's standard is. And like, if you want to be a part of the team, you're going to live up to that standard, right? Doesn't matter color, race, anything like that. If they're not pulling that weight in there, that's a different story, right? But the first step in getting to that place is accepting, right? You got to accept that people come from different places. We are a melting pot. I'm in Canada, so it's the same thing up here. I think we've been a little bit more liberal with it, and it's not been as big of a deal. But um, again, like, what choices do you have? All right, I'll tell you from my own personal experience. Um, in my business, I'm a minority in terms of culture, right? I have
Mm-hmm.
maybe 4 or 5, Canadian guys that are still with us, and they work right alongside with Spanish, Europeans. Like, there's no real barriers there, right? We're all doing the same job. Again, we found the common ground, right? We make sure that those bedrock, boundaries are in place. And again, that served us. That's allowed us to have, have crews that work together. Like, I have a Spanish and a Ukrainian crew working side by side today, right? Big
Yeah.
jobs, like, again, we're not encountering that. I've had Sikh crews, believe it or not, and again, I don't care what you stand for, as long as it's not crossing boundaries that we've set and we've agreed to as a company. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess the next question that I've got as far as that is because see a lot of our older
Mhm.
generation still has issues, but
Yep.
I guess the one thing that I'm trying to figure out is because I had one come to me. He said, "Well, we got to let him go because he said we're not being able to get the production out of him that we're needing to. So what are we going to do?" And that comes back to the point of, well, if is he producing or is it that's you get where I'm coming from as far as
So,
the legal
but
standpoint goes.
let's go back to the system, though, right? Who's being a prick, first of all, right? Who's the prick?
It'd be the journeyman or superintendent there.
Okay. So, like, if you're being a prick, you have to correct that before you're going to address the issue, right? So, like, there is, like, that's what I'm saying about setting that boundary. So, like, before someone says that someone's unproductive or useless or he does this or he does that, like, all that to me is gossip. Like, that's unsubstantiated, like, gossip, right? I'm gonna reflect back on him and be like, okay, did you seek to understand, his position? Did you involve him, or have you put him in a silo, right? Again, you can go through this framework very, very quickly and realize, like, if you're doing one of those things, all right, you're the problem. They're not the problem,
Okay.
right? So more about just getting them recognize that, and unfortunately they have to recognize it themselves, and that's a little bit more of the problem with the older generation is like they're looking
Yeah.
at retirement like they're not changing, nothing's changing, right? They've had it their way, this way, and it's been that way for so long, and they're very stubborn. And I've had a very difficult time with that particular, that particular group, but I understand why, and I completely, I'm sympathetic towards their position, but that's becoming less and less relevant in our industry, right? Like, again, what are we looking at? 5, 6, 7, 8 years before they're, before all the baby boomers are retired out, right?
Yeah.
In the meantime, if you're a smart, progressive business owner, you're going to go and find, a leader in that group, get them collaborating with your group, and that problem goes away pretty quickly, right? Like, it's just more about understanding. The more that they understand and accept, all right, we're all the same people at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
That's my 2 cents. I don't know if anyone has anything else they want to add.
Solid training, Jay. Thank you for this.
Yeah, no problem. We're gonna be adding on some things to it. So, again, guys, thanks so much for showing up today, and everybody have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Jeff.
Before that,
Yep.
how do I get a copy of the recording? Sorry.
Yeah, so we post all of them in school with the SOP
Perfect.
and everything else. Yeah, every week